Now, thank you all for coming to what I think is going to be an enriching conversation on refugees and citizenship. I'm Thomas Chatterton-Williams. I'm joined here by Marian Detjen. She's a professor of history at Bard College, Berlin, and works as academic director for Bard College Berlin's program for international education and social change. She's the author of a book on escape helpers after the building of the Berlin Wall. She'll be speaking today as an activist in the Pro-Refugee Movement. I'm also joined by Sun Wook Kim, a professor in the Department of Philosophy and chair of the Center for Ethics Value at Sungsil University, Seoul, South Korea. He's president of the Korean Society for Hannah Arendt Studies and is the translator of 4 books of Hannah Arendt into Korean, including Crisis of the Republic, which contains On Civil Disobedience. Marian's going to speak first for about 10 to 15 minutes, followed by Sun Wook. Then I'll ask a couple questions and open it up to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, very much for inviting me to this exciting conference, and thank you, Thomas, for your introduction. I will talk now. Like this? Okay. Like this. So I'll talk about political and moral claims of civil disobedience in the German refugee crisis of the last years. And I'm aware of the fact that the last German who stood here in a Hannah Arendt conference to speak to you about Germany was Mark Jongen, the so-called party philosopher of the AfD, the German extreme right-wing party. And one could easily get the impression that Jongen, as a right-winger, and I, as a confessing liberal leftist, represent the two opposing and conflicting camps which these days, like in the US, challenge and strain the cohesion of German society, each claiming to fight for the true Germany, the good Germany, the other Germany, thereby appropriating the tradition of the emigrants and resistance fighters of the Nazi period. In some fundamental questions, Mark Jongen and I are indeed symmetrically opposed. There exists a deep rift in German society over the question whether Germany should be an immigration country or not, whether citizenship and belonging in Germany have to be ethnically and culturally defined or not. In these questions, Mark Jongen and I are indeed in opposing political camps. He wants ethnicity and culture, whatever that is for him, as the decisive criteria for being German. I want civil and political rights and duties as the decisive criteria. This can be a matter of negotiation and public debate, and I'm prepared to discuss this with everyone, also with extreme right-wingers. But here the symmetry between us already ends, because the far right usually does not argue with negotiable goals, but with unnegotiable alleged realities, insisting that the ethno-cultural identity of the German people is a given and denying all other modes of belonging that our constitution provides. And for my talk, it's important to keep in mind this difference between our negotiable differences in what we want and our non-negotiable differences in how we treat reality. So let me now first give you a personal account of how I, as an activist, experienced the pro-refugee movement in Germany in 2015-16, its political agendas and maybe proto-revolutionary impetus. Then second, analyze 2 claims of that movement and why they are so ambivalent and even futile in the current political situation in Germany, and then conclude with a suggestion on how to read Hannah Arendt and what to take from her thinking into the future. Some of you will remember the images of that memorable summer 2015, the so-called summer of welcome in Germany, when thousands and thousands of asylum seekers poured into the country every week and met a wave of solidarity and willingness to help among Germans. While now it's become customary to look down on that solidarity movement as naive and to discredit the helpers as Gutmenschen, goody-goodies, in the days that solidarity was actually felt as a novum in history, something completely new, surprising, a new spirit to change the country and to change the world. And more than 10% of the grown-up population in Germany, almost 8 million people, that's really an amazing number, was actively involved in that movement. Around 15,000 initiatives and projects emerged. Many of them still are working. I started my own engagement with an NGO organizing private sponsorships for family reunifications, and then quickly moved on to activities which are more in my professional field as a historian, first initiating a coalition of action called Wir machen das, we are doing it, that works towards the visibility of forced migrants and towards bringing the newcomers as independent voices into the public discourse. And then getting involved with higher education of displaced young people, which finally brought me to Bard College Berlin, where we now have 30 full scholarships for displaced students. In 2015 and even 2016, we felt an overwhelming optimism. History seemed to be on our side. Our activities were humanitarian, but we brought them into the political arena. The political activism of the pro-refugee mass movement played out on 3 levels. The first level was internal German politics. There was a strong impetus to give the finishing blow to Germany's self-denial of not being an immigration country. With 20% of the German population nowadays having a so-called immigration background, either born or with 1 or 2 parents born as foreigners, and Germany suddenly showing such surprising generosity as a nation, it seemed possible at that time to get rid of the ethno-national dimension of the German state construction altogether and to base the country on a new inclusive identity. The second level was European and international. Without really offering alternatives, and that's important, the pro-refugee movement implicated a protest against the EU border regime, the illegalization and criminalization of migrants, the horrible dying in the Mediterranean, and the unfair system that puts most of the burden of unregulated migration to the southern states of Europe, where they arrive with their dinghies. The life-saving and refugee help activities of young people like Sara Mardini, the Bard College Berlin student who is still in prison in Greece for her activities, manifested a moral and political claim that the EU member states forcing the migrants to do such dangerous journeys and risk their lives is unacceptable. Projects, organizations, and coalitions like the Seebrücke demanding safe routes and safe havens for people who are forced to flee topple the Dublin system and the entire post-war international refugee order that obviously doesn't function properly anymore. The third level for politicization is most far-reaching, I think, and least talked about. It emerged in the conviviality with newcomers from the Middle East, once they had arrived and we got to know each other. They brought their own realities, their own knowledge, and getting close to them and befriending them meant that we started to connect to these realities. So the causes and consequences of the Arab Rebellion, and especially the Syrian revolution, suddenly became real to us through these connections. The dictatorships, the crimes, the murdering, the torturing, the misery, the persecutions, the bravery of the people in Syria in their battle for freedom, and the complicated reasons for people to flee. Suddenly we realized how near the Middle East is to Europe and felt the post-colonial connections. This new sense of transnational and global responsibility might seem threatening and overwhelming, but to discover it and share it in public settings, public situations, created a profound happiness that I experienced, a very special kind of public happiness that I have only found described adequately in Hannah Arendt's descriptions of the revolutionary experience. Did the movement violate laws for the purpose of testing their constitutionality, which is the main qualification of civil disobedience, according to Hannah Arendt? There was definitely a preparedness, a negotiation of the possibilities and necessities to break laws. Projects like the International Conference of Traffickers and People Smugglers in October 2015 in Munich, or Fluchthilfe and Du, Refugee Help and You, or the PEN Collective, developed strategies against the criminalization of migration in the German residency law that also provided possibilities to break laws. But we always had parts of the authorities on our side. though other parts were very much against us. And paradoxically, all these projects received public funding, money from the state. Did the movement claim to represent the majority of the German people? Its complicated and unresolved relationship to the majority society can be analyzed in two different claims. First of all, there was Angela Merkel's famous sentence, "Wir schaffen das," we can do it, or we can work on it, we can manage. My own organization called itself "Wir machen das," we are doing it, to enforce the determination in an avant-gardist approach that we are doing it anyway, whether we can do it or not. Merkel's "we can do it" does sound a little bit like Obama's "yes, we can," but it has different connotations. Schaffen literally in German means to create. It has the notion of working hard, and once you have finished the job, then you can rest. That you work so hard and that you show sweat and really lean into it while being confident in your abilities is seen as part of the moral justification of what you do. So the "Wir schaffen das" has this intrinsic value of Protestant work ethics. The "Wir schaffen das," to be able to do it and work for it, refer to the challenge of housing and feeding and clothing and providing an income for the 1 million refugees in 2015-16. But it also connected to a much larger challenge, the challenge of transforming Germany into an immigration country, that first activism level that I mentioned. The immense struggle to achieve and acknowledge this transformation has been going on since decades. The years between 2000 and 2014, with new citizenship laws and new residency laws, could be seen as a breakthrough. But that acknowledgement and that change were heavily conditioned. The residency law 2005 is sometimes falsely called immigration law, but actually, strictly speaking, it is not an immigration law at all. It curbs immigration, but it's an integration law. It allows immigration under the condition of integration. So without integration, no immigration. That's the concept behind it. But what does integration in the German context mean? It implies that you start off with a unified whole community, Germany, and then a foreign element enters, and then this element, as well as the entire community, have to change and to assimilate to each other and to merge until you can't tell the difference anymore, and until the foreignness has gone and the wholeness and unity are reestablished. So this enigmatic "it" in Merkel's sentence, "we can do it," can be specified as integration. We can do integration of all these refugees, and once that is done, we will enjoy German wholeness again. So I and my fellow activists never subscribed to this integration concept. We are inclusionists, not integrationists. We want citizenship and belonging based on political and social rights and duties. And we find the cultural notions of integration dubious and unsatisfactory. But in the situation of 2015-16, we aligned with the integrationists and were to a certain degree grateful for Merkel's government. We thought that we could work with that approach and that we were allies. And now, with the hindsight of more than 2 years and confronted with an ever-rising AfD, extreme right-wing movement, the problems of this alliance between integrationists and inclusionists are starting to show. That integrationist shift in immigration politics in 2000-2005 had actually fueled the right-wing, ethno-pluralist, cultural racist movement. Ethno-pluralists notably differ from former racists and Nazis by allegedly not claiming genetic superiority over other races, but insisting on the existence of distinct ethnocultural circles and identities. These people were able to make use of the integration paradigm then by taking it dead serious. They expanded their understanding of what it means to them to be German to what they call the Christian Judeo community of tradition. So they appropriated the Jews and made cultural integration the main criteria. And they claimed that Muslims can never be integrated simply because they are Muslims, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then they grabbed all the racist notions floating around and attached them to Muslimhood and to the allegedly Muslim Kulturkreis, the parts of the world where the refugees come from. So now, even if you don't share that plain and obvious racism, but share the integration paradigm and believe in cultural integration, it's hard to deny that it won't be possible to melt all these newcomers into that alleged Christian Judeo community of tradition. The dominance of the integration paradigm shifts the whole discourse about refugees and immigration to a field where we can only lose. More and more people, also in the political center now, believe that Merkel was actually wrong with her claim, and that Germany can actually not do it, no matter how good or bad the social and material situation in Germany is. By arranging ourselves with the integration concept and jumping onto this Wir schaffen das mantra of the Chancellor, we miss to develop the political ideas needed to create the political and social conditions for the inclusion, not the integration, of the newcomers. And we failed to problematize those parts of the German constitution that legitimize ethno-nationalist and culturalist concepts of belonging. We shuffled ourselves into a corner where we now seem as naive, as stupid and irresponsible agents and accomplices of an immigration experiment that was bound to fail, and find ourselves entangled in all kinds of absurd discussions, like whether the Islam belongs to Germany or not. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump over the second claim and come to my conclusion. So, looking back, we have failed in many respects, and we surely will fail in the future. We need to get a lot better in developing convincing ideas how inclusion actually can work, and to reconceptualize the nation state and international system that deals with refugees. But reading Hannah Arendt helps me on another level. When I reread on revolution for this conference, I realized that she was probably at least as preoccupied with the failings of revolutions than with their success. Revolutions fail almost necessarily because they cannot institutionalize. However, they can create traditions. And in the last paragraph of the book, Hannah Arendt writes, and I quote her, "There is nothing that could compensate for this failure of revolutions or prevent it from becoming final except memory and recollection," end of the quote. And then she turns to the poet René Char to explain what could be remembered as the lost treasure of the revolution. And I quote her again, "The treasure was no more and no less than he himself, that he had found himself, that he no longer suspected himself of insincerity, that he needed no mask and no play acting to appear, that he, wherever he went, appeared to others and to himself as who he was, that he could afford to go naked," end of the quote. And one of my Syrian students said it in much simpler words. She said, "Freedom is a lifestyle." And this discovery that we had, I think, will survive no matter what happens, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Sunwak.
I'm doing the right thing here.
There?
Yeah.
And you can use the clicker. Oh. It should work if you like.
Right.
Otherwise,
This is go down or
that I believe the right one goes
down.
advances,
Okay. Right.
and that one goes down.
Hello, everyone. I'm Son Kim. And thank you very much, Thomas, for introducing me. And also thank you, Roger, for inviting me here. Today, I want to introduce one of the most remarkable phenomenon, unprecedented event that happened in Korea between October 2016 and March 2017. Right. Now you can see the picture. They are all people, and the white dots are the candlelights. So we Koreans like to call this event as the Candlelight Revolution. Here we have several facts about the Candlelight Rallies. The first rally occurred in the evening of October 29th. The following 22nd consecutive rallies occurred always on Saturdays. At the first rally, the participants numbered in about 20,000, but the numbers grew and grew. And at the sixth rally, there were more than 2.3 million participants. The average number of the participants of all 23 rallies was about 730,000. The cumulative number reached at 16.85 million. At the coldest rally day, which was January 14th, the number was 150,000. Considering that the whole population of Korea is about 50 million, these numbers means quite a lot. Let's see the pictures. My wife and I are among this group. You cannot see them, but yeah. The most popular rally slogan was this: "Is this country really?" And the next one is resignation of Park Geun-hye, who is the former president who was impeached by these rallies. This clearly showed that what people wanted, the impeachment of the incompetent and corrupted president. And there are also longer slogans that were made as songs. One was made of the first article of the Korean Constitution, that is, Korea shall be a democratic republic. The sovereignty shall reside in people, and all states' authority shall emanate from the people. And people wanted to have a country that practices the spirit of the Constitution. To reach that goal, legal institutions such as police, public offices, National Assembly, and judicial institutions should have incarnated the constitutional spirit. Another longer slogan was this. Darkness cannot defeat light. Lies cannot defeat truth. Factual truths will never sink. We will never give up. During the President Park's period, people experienced extreme malfunction, concealment of many evil projects, and the lies of government. The direct ignition of the Candlelight Rallies was made by the exposure of the President Park's secret helper and the discovery of the evidences of their cooperated misconducts. At that time, many rumors roamed around. One day, a news reporter from the most reliable TV news program found the so-called smoking gun, which is a tablet PC that contained national secrets and the emails that showed how and what the secret helper and the high officers communicated. This discovery was televised and made public, so President Park tried to make it up by a public apology. But right that night, the same news program revealed additional facts that proved the president's apology was so dishonest. According to the Korean law, the term of presidency is a singular 5 years. Park became the president in 2013. At first, many people were excited because they expected that she would bring back the good old days, the days of her father Park Chung-hee's rapid economic growth. Her father was famous for it, but also at the same time quite notorious for his brutal dictatorship. What people immediately faced was, however, her inability to deal with the national and international affairs. Here are some examples. Only a few months after inauguration, there was a terrible accident. A cruise ship named Sewol was sunken with 304 living people. Among 476 passengers, only 172 were rescued. The whole process of rescuing and sinking was televised. So it gave a huge grief, despair, rage, and trauma to people. At her second year, Korea had a MERS situation. MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, is an epidemic. It could have been rather easily dealt with, but if it had been well managed when its first case occurred. However, it resulted in more than 12,000 people quarantined and 38 people died. At her third year, there was a huge street demonstration by farmers, and one of the protesters was directly shot by powerful water shooting from a fire engine. He came into coma and hospitalized for 10 months, after which he died. The hospital issued a death certificate where the cause of death was identified as sickness, illness, not as an external shock. It was obviously the outcome of a government's intervention. This is the list of what the President Park and her secret helper did. They are all for their own private interests. Other than this, they did many bad things at the governmental too. The government created blacklists of actors, actresses, movie producers, scholars, and professors that are critical toward the government. The government cut the funds to them. The government also created a whitelist and poured tax money to the supportive groups and institutions. The government formed a crew that systematically made fake news and wrote comments to the news articles and SNS messages so that they could manipulate public opinions. Korean CIA and the military CIA were ordered to do the same operation. The government made a policy to use only one kind of national history textbook, which glamorized and idealized her father's achievements while ignoring his crimes. So, when the inability and the corruption reached its peak, people went out to the street with candles in their hands and shouted, "Is this a country, really?" It was the moment to question about the constitutional spirit. On the street, people proclaimed that they themselves are the power holders, the proponents of the constitutional spirit, and the source of constitutional power. While these rallies went on, the National Assembly voted overwhelmingly in favor of impeaching the president. The Constitutional Court, which deals with the judicial review in Korea, finally decided to impeach the president. So she was fired. So these are pictures of the rallies. And they even use these smartphones. Yeah. They blocked them using buses. But their rally was so peaceful. They were their opinions, people's. And they got the donations from people. They shared drinks and food. This is one of the coldest days, the snow's there. So they are, marching toward the Constitutional Court. And they prayed when the verdict was made. In her article, Civil Disobedience, Hannah Arendt identifies the civil disobedience as, quote, the violation of a law for the purpose of testing its constitutionality, end quote. And she gives several qualifications for a collective action to be a civil disobedience. Now I will describe several characteristic features of the Candlelight Rallies following Arendt's qualification. First, the Candlelight Rallies were grounded on people's collective political opinions. They publicly performed actions in concert while thinking they were representatives of all the people. Second, people performatively expressed that they are the subject of power and their actions were the expression of the most fundamental spirit of the Constitution. Third, people believed that the government did not function properly and it ran against legality and the constitutionality. However, people did not find normal channels to request corrections or to make change. This point is made by Roger at his opening remarks. And fourth, people did not use violence in their actions. I believe these features clearly make the Candlelight Rallies an exemplary case for arranged civil disobedience. One interesting question here is whether the campaign is really an action of disobedience, because during the rallies, not one single person was arrested for illegal behaviors. Huge congregations campaigned always in an orderly way, and they also stopped any deviation of participants. People stayed behind the police line and didn't provoke participants. Police asked the people to keep the laws during the campaign, and they did. When the representatives of participants filed the permission to the law court for rallies, the court always allowed it. When they filed the permission for rallying near to the Blue House, the court also allowed it gradually nearer up to the 100 yard to the Blue House. The mayor of Seoul cosmopolitan city was very supportive. He recruited volunteers to secure the subway area safe. He ordered the city water department to cut the water supply when the police tried to use fire engines to suppress the rallies. He asked the nearby shops and buildings to open their restrooms to the public, and also put several portable toilets at the site. The last point is really, really important. The whole campaign was so peaceful because they learned from the past experiences. People knew that any illegal or violent actions would make participants turn their backs to the rally. Thus, they extremely restrained themselves, even when they were so angry. So, the campaign turned into a kind of cultural festival. They set up huge stages, speakers, and huge monitors to show the stage. All the money came from people's donation. Various performers and public speeches by participants were made. People were so happy at the rallies. They experienced the public happiness that Hannah Arendt mentioned in her book on revolution. Although there was no legal activity, I believe that the whole campaign was an action of disobedience. It was a disobeying action to the regime, to the political environment, to the political consciousness of the politicians, and even to the rallying participants' own old political consciousness. Here, there is another interesting implication in regard to Arendt's concept of revolution. If the same thing happened in the United States here, it may mean the recovery of the constitutional spirit. However, Koreans cannot use the expression recovery because the spirit of the Korean constitution has never substantially been realized in Korean society, although the constitution itself is written quite democratic. It was democratic even when it was first made after 3 years of the United States martial government after the liberation from Japanese colonization. It was democratic only in words, but not in reality. Now, during the rallies, people experience the identification of the constitutional spirit and their power. So, I would say that through the rallies, people became citizens, that Korea now has a civil society in its genuine sense, and that the Korean political environment went through a paradigm shift, a quantum leap. In this sense, I believe that the Candlelight Rallies also fits Arendt's idea of revolution. She says that the most important thing in revolution is the spirit of revolution. Political freedom comes into existence and to be constitutionalized through revolution. In other words, the birth of a new secular order, Novum Ordo Secularum, is the essence. Of course, Koreans did not create a new constitution, but in reality, the political freedom is now tangible, and the legal institutions begin to get their lives from the people's power. Substantially, Korea begins to have a new political order. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much. Those images were extraordinary, Sanwook. It makes me wonder why we don't have similar manifestations every week here, as there's quite a lot of corruption to be upset about. But I wonder what would have been different in Korea if the manifestations veered past civil disobedience and became violent or illegal in any way. Would that have greatly harmed the power of what these movements were able to achieve?
Well, we were liberated from Japan in 1945, and we have the first constitution in 1948. And since then, there was a lot of protests from people, but they're always nonviolent and very peaceful. But the violence comes from the government side. So they brutally, suppressed the rallies. It happened, actually, in 1960, there was a student demonstration, and the president was stepped down that time. But 1 year later, military coup happened. And in 1980, also there was a, so-called the spring of democracy in Korea. But, right after that, a terrible massacre happened in Gwangju area, that's a southern part of South Korea. And in 1986, there was a protest again, and we had to change the constitution. But, we also, the next president was a retired military, general, and he, sustained the very extreme conservative, politics. And after that, we have some democratic leaders, fortunately. But, about 10 years ago, there was a resurgence of extreme, conservative party again. So now we needed that protest. But this time was quite different, People has been always peaceful and nonviolent. And this time, even the police was nonviolent and quite helpful, actually, to the protesters. So that's a big change. So we have a big, huge history behind.
So it seems that it was a crucial component of the movement's success that they never crossed the line.
Exactly, yes.
Marian, I'm fascinated in your talk by what seems to me to be a crucial difference between Germany and the US, in that oftentimes civil disobedience here are trying to get the government to live up to the spirit and ideals of the Constitution, whereas I think that you're saying that in Germany the Constitution itself must be improved because it has a kind of ethnocultural component to it which may not be compatible with a more humane understanding of a multicultural society. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the German constitution has this ethnocultural dimension, but it is just one dimension among others. So it also has a human rights dimension, a social dimension, a federalist dimension, and this ethnoculturalist dimension can be explained with the challenges after the war, when all these millions and millions of Germans in the eastern territories would have been stateless otherwise. So you needed this construction, this ethnoculturalist construction to provide citizenship for these altogether 15 million expellees that eventually arrived in West Germany. But now, yeah, I would fight for this dimension, to get rid of this dimension, and it is a pretext for nationalist, ethno-racist, right-wing movement to claim that Germany, that the reality of Germany is that it's not an immigration country in contrast to the United States, and that is yeah, very difficult to, in our development, to acknowledge our identity as an immigration country that we have, of course, always been. What was the question?
Well, I'm just very interested in what you explained as the difference between the negotiable differences in what we want and the non-negotiable differences in what reality we experience.
Yeah, so the government, the German government, is aware of these tensions within the constitution, and I think that we as left-wingers have to be careful not to make the same mistake and to claim, which is often being done, and to claim that the constitution is purely based on rights, on civil rights, and to ignore this difficult other dimension. So there's a constant, continuous negotiation process going on, what the reality of our constitution is and how we should develop into the future to achieve the goals that each of the sides has.
How do you convince somebody who may not be an AfD supporter but does look around and see his society, her society changing around them? How do you convince them that there is a way of being German that is different than what they've traditionally conceived it to be? How do you do that in a way that's not only morally correct but persuasive?
Well, first of all, you can argue with the self-contradictions of this ethnoculturalist claim. How do you define culture? How do you define ethnos? The Nazis did it in a racist way. The traditional German citizenship concept did it with ancestry, that you needed to have German parents and grandparents and great-grandparents to be German. When the Jews were thrown out of citizenship by the Nazis, that was a breach with this principle. So there are contradictions in this way of thinking that cannot be resolved. So that is one way that I would argue. And the other way would be that it's simply unrealistic to keep the population in Germany homogeneous ethnically and culturally, with 20% of people with a so-called immigration background. You won't go back to getting rid of them. Yeah, it's not possible, and also economically and politically. I mean, we are a diminishing population. We need immigration, and everyone knows it. These would be my arguments.
Yeah, I was living in Berlin last year, and I was very struck by some of the ads that the AfD had that said, "New Germans, no thanks, we'll make our own," and it showed a couple with babies.
Yeah, they really have to hurry up with that.
I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions if there are some. We have about 25 minutes.
Broader sense of Hannah Arendt, which seems to me, this morning anyway, to include political activity in general. I think it's an important distinction, and I see it in protests from the 60s up to today, where even in mass protests, subgroups elect to do civil disobedience, meaning specifically to break a police rule or to break a law, specifically to challenge the law and to take the consequences of a legal response and condemnation. In Korea, it seems to me that it's the revolution, the change, was not, in a narrower sense, civil disobedience. It was protest, it was pushing within the law and within the customs of the country and so forth, that without violence and without breaking the law, made change. And I'd like to hear some comment about the distinction, particularly in the current moment in the United States, where there's the beginning of the use of mob, the term mob, about protest, which is sometimes vocal, but not always and not usually breaking the law or breaking rules.
Thank you, Sun-Wook.
Well, after having that big change in South Korea, Hannah Arendt became really famous in Korean society. And as a president of Hannah Arendt Society, I had to organize 24 consecutive lectures on her theory and to teach people what he really meant by the civil disobedience and revolution and power, and especially the banality of evil. That was really key. Now, what is the most important thing was her idea of power, I believe. And power is directly opposite to violence. So she has a very, different ideas from Max Weberian ideas of power or Carl Schmitt's idea. We believe that political change must be based on, must be based on, people's power, which does not include any violent actions. Even revolution should be nonviolent, because in broader sense, revolution, includes the process of liberation. But in her book on revolution, Hannah Arendt clearly separated from liberation. So liberation and revolution. Liberation and revolution is totally different things. They are always connected. But the key of the revolution is the creation of the secular order, right? So I tried to explain Korean experience based on Hannah Arendt's idea, and also this is just a part of that. And so I may introduce other kinds of direct action, different kinds of protests. But I think basically since I'm quite agree with her idea of political power, I really wanted to use her conceptions. And that could be the answer.
Marian, do you have anything?
Yeah, it's interesting that in the German context, the theory of civil disobedience by Hannah Arendt is very much perceived as a theory about moral disobedience more than political disobedience, as the disobedience of an individual against immoral claims, connected to Hannah Arendt's saying no one has the right to obey. And she said that with reference to Eichmann, and that if you get in a dictatorship, in a totalitarian system, if you get orders that are inhuman, that you don't have the right to obey, but that you need your moral standing to say that you are not going to do this. And there were several situations now in the refugee crisis where I thought maybe this is now a situation to disobey and to break the law, to smuggle someone. But Hannah Arendt says that you are only allowed to do this if there's no other way, no legal way. And we always found legal ways in the end. So as long as there are legal loopholes to resolve inhuman, unbearable situations, you don't need that civil disobedience. And I also think that it makes sense to stick to this difference between protest, revolution, and civil disobedience as a moral quality.
Thank you.
I too was struck seeing the photographs of the candlelight protests. I kept thinking, where are we? Yeah. Okay. I too was struck watching the videos of the candlelight rallies about, like, where are we in America? Why don't we have millions in the streets? We've had many, but not like that. And I'm wondering, as outsiders looking at us, what your thoughts are.
Me too. That's a good question.
Yeah, definitely you need a recovery of a constitutional spirit. Well, I really share, you know.
We've been in recovery for a long time now, and it's still, you know.
Can you help me?
I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Are we lacking some type of democratic spirit, civil spirit from a European or Korean perspective? Are we lulled into complacency?
No, I think it's the general situation also in Poland, in Hungary, in Russia. There are demonstrations every now and then that in the end are not successful. And I was very grateful to hear that account on Korea, because it is so rare. It is such a surprising event, and I felt that this candlelight is not only a Korean internal thing, but also it can be a global candlelight for all the other revolutions that are tragically failing in the Middle East and in Ukraine and at other places, and the failing of the protest in the more and more authoritarian countries around the world.
I think that a lot of what's going on is what's presented in the media, and we're not seeing the people on the street that we here expect to see on the street, but I think what we are seeing is people showing up in mass for Trump rallies, and mile-long lines to get into, and that seems like that is people showing up politically and non-violently, but not in this, we're sort of in a bubble here, and we don't see it as the same kind of political action.
Do we have any students?
Okay, I just wanted to address something specific to Germany. Recently, a footballer on the national team named Mesut Ozil actually left the team because of backlash he got from actually a picture that he had taken with the president, the Turkish president Erdogan, Recep Erdogan, and he cited the racism and basically like malicious comments that he received from fans and Germans on social media, and he talked about just the football federation being very disrespectful to him and his culture, and so like for me that was sort of like I was wondering, how does this sort of represent this sort of inroads that we see with Turkish people in Germany having established themselves as Germans and becoming part of German culture in a very significant way as it pertains to a sport in this case. But now we see like Ozil becoming sort of a victim of this. It's not particularly related to like constitution or laws, but it's more of like a social and cultural aspect of this sort of targeting and or lack of effort on Germans' part to be inclusive. So I was just wondering, like, can you speak more on that and like the cultural aspects of German, like ethno-plurality, stuff like that? Yeah.
So this racism against the Turkish minority has been going on all along. Yeah, it's been a constant thing. But since 2000, one could have the illusion, maybe, or the impression that some of that these problems had been overcome. And Özil himself, he wrote an autobiography about his life and about his success as a football star, and he was actually an example of successful integration. He was cheered as a model for integration in Germany, and the more surprising it was, or the more shocking, that all that racism then came up again against him, and that the media and his own football team and this football world did not protect him. Yeah, they really left him in the rain. And it's, yeah, so the rise in racism in Germany right now is also remarkable. And it's the same football team that 3 years ago was decidedly pro-refugee, inclusionist, integrationist. So the mood is changing, and that was what I wanted to explain, that this integrationist ideology we had shows its downside now.
Thank you. This is just a factual question. During the candlelight marches or gatherings, were there any counter demonstrations by supporters of Park? And were they peaceful, if there were?
Thank you so much for bringing that issue. Actually, there was a counter rallies, and that's a powerful, but the approval rate of the people was very low. But there's a really extreme right rallies there, and they always carried Korean national flag and also American national flag, and sometimes they brought Israeli national flag. Yeah, so that means that really conservative Christians behind. Yeah, but there are always some counter rallies and differences in opinions. So I think that's quite okay. But one thing that I want to point is that after we had a new president, the approval rate of him is always about 80%. It's really big, isn't it? It's about for 1 year. And it dropped down to near to 50%. It's still quite high, but it's really the lowest rate that he had. It was early summer. That's because of his policies on to shortening the gap between the haves and have-nots, and also real estate policy. So that was quite unpopular. So that made that drop. But right after that, there was the second summit between South Korea and North Korea. So the approval rate rise up to 80. But the point that I have to make is that when his approval rate is the lowest, the approval rate of the opposition party didn't get any increase. The opposition party was the one who supported the impeached, the president. But we have to, the electoral vote for every 4 years, so they are still in there. So that means that the people's mind, or I use the term political consciousness, but the political climate is absolutely fundamentally changed. So currently at this point of time, there is still counter rallies going on, but it didn't get any attention. And one thing, remarkable is that they always try to use some kind of violence while they're rallying. They're shouting and speaking bad words, and also kicking to the critical people or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. In the United States, we don't have any military bases. You come from 2 countries where the United States has major military bases. And I guess this question is about the gentleman from Korea. I come from Latin America, and it's an area where the United States has a history of interventions, overthrowing governments, supporting dictator militarships. I'm just wondering if by having the United States military installations in South Korea, it helped to maintain those military dictatorships for a while, and in turn, that procrastinated democracy coming to Korea. And then if you want to feel like commenting on Donald Trump's friendship with the North Korean president, feel free.
You know that the city-state Athens in ancient Greek, that's quite democratic in domestic politics, but imperialistic about the international politics. And I think America is the same, and that's the same case for to Korea. But when we were liberated from Japan, and when we had a first president, actually, I think he became the president because he's really good in English, and also he was educated in the United States, and he was PhD in international politics. He got that degree from Princeton University, and that American military government want to have some cooperative figure. So he was not that popular at the time. Because with the help of American military martial government, he could become a president. But not many Korean people helped him. So because of that, he needed some high officers. So he recruited all the the betrayers, the collaborators for Japanese government during the colonization period. So that's the terrible history, maybe the beginning of a Korean tragedy. But after that, America was not that evil to Koreans, but they are always behind the scene, and they are not really helpful for the dictators. But they are not. America is not really helpful to the democratic leaders too. But often America protected the democratic leaders when they're exiled to the United States.
We have time for one more question over here. Is the mic still around?
Thanks. Seems to me we've kind of lightly touched on something that's much more fundamental here, which is one of the difficulties with civil disobedience is the willingness of the authorities to use violence against it. Okay? And I noted in your little mini history of Korea the prevalence of protests and the prevalence of violent suppression of them. To me, the fundamental question is, what happened this time? Why didn't the authorities crush this? Okay? What changed? Because all of us here are a little worried about that same issue right now.
As I said, there are many cases of protest in the history. I think the protesters have sown the seeds for the democracy, and I think we had the fruits at this time. I think that's the answer. So we are liberated from 1945 and had the new government in 48, and since then, it's just 70 years. So many protests were there. So this is like the peak point.
But could it also be that the government itself was divided?
Well, I think the key was the former president. She was the daughter of dictators. And people had kind of a homesick for the old regime. But their dreams were totally broken during her period. So there was no way to go back or dream back. So I think that's the point that that's the thing. So
But
we
did-
have to go only forward. So
But
people
didn't-
realize that.
But didn't the president call for the authorities to crack down on it, and they disobeyed?
Well, right after her apology, and actually, there was a so-called concrete supporters, and the approval rate was always 25%. However, she was bad during her regime. But after the apology that I mentioned, the approval rate dropped into 15%. And after the second, the exposure of the facts, the rate dropped into 5%. And 5% means almost zero, right? So, and then the process just went directly to the impeachment. So after the impeachment proposal made by the National Assembly, just he had to stay in the Blue House, and he couldn't do anything. So that's how the police and the other legal institutes was quite supportive to the rallies. That's what I think.
Thank you, Sun-Wook. Thank you, Marion. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
all.
Thank you.
The next panel will be Activism Through Art.
So we're just gonna set up and go right into the next panel. Thank you very much, Thomas and Marion and Sun-Wook. We're gonna have a next panel, so please, if you need to quickly use the restroom, but we're gonna try and get started within a minute or so. You want to put your own? Thank you. We should watch your presentation, huh?
I'm guessing you are Freder and you are Renata?
Yes, we are.
Nice to meet you. Nice
Pleasure.
to meet you too. Maybe. Hi.
Yes, it works. There it is.
Okay, you're all set?
And the microphone, we have two.
So there's a microphone on every chair.
Oh, okay. I think that might be okay. We might look a bit funny to the audience, maybe standing up. And to your live streaming.
I can take another mic.
Show you. Forget when there is people.
I
It's the world of teleoperation,
I don't have the screen
I
here.
take it in my hand and then give it to Freder, and Freder gives it to me. Okay, perfect.
It just goes right back in here and it just pushes right in.
Okay.
And this way you don't have to futz with the...
We will not use this. I think we'll just put it away because otherwise I have it in my face. I'm so small. So we can just...
Is that all right? You want me to lower it really out of the way?
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Does it run? Yes.
I need this picture here, and it doesn't show up.
Well, even if we don't see it, we can.
Okay, if you need anything, I'm sitting right over
It's
there.
either or. Ah, yeah, okay.
This mic doesn't turn off, so if you...
I'm not going to read out.
Yeah, no. I am not in brackets.
Why don't you guys sit
No.
there? Are you going to stand?
We're going to stand. Yeah.
So I'm going to just introduce you, and then
Okay.
we'll go.
I might take my jacket as well because I'm a bit...
Okay. All right. So welcome. We're gonna. I know there's people who are going to be coming in as we get going, and that's great. But I just want us to try and keep on schedule. Just to give you a sense, we're going to go till about 4:05, and then have a break, and then there will be two final panels this afternoon, and then the reception, which we're all looking forward to. this is, we always love at these conferences to bring in not only a wide range of geographical voices, but also, and ideological voices, but also where people come from, professional, artistic, business, and other different worlds of life, and try and see how different people in different walks of the world are thinking about questions that sometimes become a little too focused in the academy. And so I'm really thrilled here to be have a panel on art and activism, and have 3 artists up here. 2 who are going to offer a presentation, Renate Stie and Frieder Schnock from Berlin. These are both Berlin-based conceptual artists. I first heard of them, as I think many did, with a very famous project they did in Berlin a number of years ago where they put up flags with the Nazi laws about the Jews on them in the old Jewish quarter of Berlin, which became a place of memory and the symbolic dealing with memory in a way that tried to bring the civil sphere and the political sphere to us on a daily basis as you walk through Berlin. Their most recent project is a project on women in World War II, based on the American character Rosie the Riveter, called Rosie Won the War, and was recently exhibited at the Boca Raton Museum of Art. They're going to give a presentation on their ideas around art and activism and civil disobedience and citizenship. And after that, to my left, Nelly Ben-Hayoun is going to pose 1 or 2 questions to them, and then open it up for debate. Nelly does so many things it's hard to know where to start, but she's plurality, yes. She's an award-winning French designer and filmmaker. She's currently finishing up a new movie called I Am Not a Monster, in brackets, that I happen to be in, I just say. I'm very happy about that. But it's very much about Hannah Arendt.
No, this one. Well, actually, you will be pleased to know, Roger, that you made it to the final cut. I mean, we are literally just finishing it now. And it's not because he invited me to the conference, and just to be clear.
Exactly.
It's for the bow tie, obviously.
Exactly. She's also the founder of the University of the Underground, a subversive, tuition-free, educative, and cultural program. I guess she has some fans here from the University of the Underground, or just like the idea. Anyway, we're going to start. So please, Renate and Frieder.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you, Roger, having us. This is so interesting here, and I also wanted to thank the students who are involved with the organization here. They're doing a fantastic job. It's really great how you learn early on how to do such things. It's really great. Well, Frieder and I are devoted teachers, you can tell. We teach at different universities, and we teach at Beuth University of Technology in Berlin. And we are also honorary professors at Leuphana University in Lüneburg, where we teach at the Department of Cultural Studies and Philosophy. But we are also co-founders of Human Rights Watch Berlin Committee, and are active in many fields discussing global problems, and are currently involved in a special foundation called Normandy Foundation, which has been founded to keep up the legacy and the memory of Normandy and the invasion of Normandy, World War II, the relationship between Europe and the US, which is more important than ever, I would say. That's why we are also happy to have an American Academy in Berlin, which is also crucial for the dialogue between the two countries, because that is our fear, that this might get lost over time, that actually the two continents are kind of, you know, going further away from each other, and that would be a pity. So we have to stay close and look at our common and mutual history and our collective memory, I would say. And collective memory, as it is reflected through media, through art, is something we are both devoted to. Working together is not always easy. We disagree on many things, but we also agree on things, and we can actually create powerful, I would say, tools in public space by communicating on different levels as a man and a woman and in a dialogue, which is actually what Hannah Arendt and Jaspers did, if I understand it right. I wanted to recall something you all know, and that is Michelangelo's David. You know that Michelangelo was asked to work on a sculpture made of piece of marble, and actually this David was a political figure, because Florence wanted to show Rome that they were powerful. And actually, they wouldn't avoid a war, and they would battle against them if they would try to attack them. And how did they wanted it to be? They had the idea to create the sculpture of a nude man, beautiful, because beauty and nudity is a powerful tool when in public space. And he also has a sling with stones. And this showed that we got all the weapons to go against you. You all know the sculpture in Florence. And what's so interesting about the sculpture is, and that brings me back to our Berlin reality, that public space and the commissions and committees, and I'm the chair of the Public Art Committee in Berlin, advisory board in Berlin, that it's always the same. The Signoria, you know, the city government of Florence told Michelangelo, don't put David high up on a column. We want it to be lower so people can really see the power. This is why Michelangelo has actually such short legs like Mel Gibson, for example. And yeah, when you look at him, it's disproportionate, and it's because, you know, he had to bring the sculpture down. He was very annoyed about it. And so you see that art and politics go closely together. And it's still the same thing. In Germany, it's a bit different than here. We are very, we believe in our government. We want it to be strong. We work with the government. Everything in public space is financed actually with public money. Schools, universities anyway, and public art too. So it means that everything in public space goes through a committee which is put together from different sides. It has to be interdisciplinary, and yeah, and then it gets discussed in some way or another. And
here's an example from Paris, 1871, and something went completely wrong because an outspoken artist, Gustave Courbet, mentioned that there shouldn't be any more columns as a sign for emperors, and actually all the columns should be removed, and the column on the Place Vendôme you see here should be moved to the Invalides. But some things went wrong, and the communards here took over and took this column down. So when the restoration came, they were looking for a victim, and Gustave Courbet was the target. And here is an ironic comment of his fellow communards, and not only the column in the Vendôme Square is toppled here, it's a pissoir, because he said all the columns. And as you see, the pissoir used to be a column too. And so the government put him into jail for half a year. And he had to flee to Switzerland because they wanted him to pay for the cost of the re-erection. So he didn't follow the sentence, artist work, don't speak. And so he ran into trouble.
Okay, so here we are in West Berlin in 1963, and you see a famous figure of American politics, John F. Kennedy. That was in June '63, and Willy Brandt, the reigning mayor of Berlin. Berlin is a city and a state, for those of you who don't know that, and we have a mayor, but otherwise a senate who runs the city. And so Willy Brandt welcomed him at the Schöneberg Town Hall, which hosted the West Berlin government till the wall came down in '89. And this is where Kennedy said the famous sentence, "Ich bin ein Berliner," for the first time. He said it various times all over the city when visiting the wall. And so you see the cheering crowds. I can only encourage you to go on YouTube and to look at the material there. Then you'll see that there was a sea of people. West Berliners were so devoted to the US until the Iraq War, I should say. And here you see what happened 4 years later. The Shah of Persia came to Berlin and brought his secret police who went against students who demonstrated against the Shah. And this is what started the student revolution in Berlin. And that same day, Benno Ohnesorg, a student, was killed in front of the Deutsche Oper on Bismarckstraße, and that became then a whole process of things. I'm saying that because it's the same area where we have put up the memorial, which Roger pointed out. It's quite a blank, and you would say today a boring living area. You know, you don't necessarily want to live there in Schöneberg. And, but it used to be interesting because it was created and found its so-called Bavarian Quarter in there, like Bavarian-shaped timber wood neo-Renaissance houses by Mr. Haberland, a Jewish investor. And the other famous Jewish citizen who lived there were Hannah Arendt, Giselle Freund, Albert Einstein, Carl Einstein, goes on and on. And so this is quite a civil society that shaped also the environment there. And this was the place where Jewish families had been brought from all over to the city by the Nazis before deportation. And they were stuffed in so-called Jews' houses, Judenhäuser. And then they were deported from Schöneberg to all kind of camps in Poland and other parts of Europe. And so in the end of the 80s, some citizen came together in Schöneberg and said, we want to create a memorial in honor of the victims. And then I said to Frieda, let's do it. Let's try to find a way of kind of presenting civil rights in a different way. And they wanted to have this memorial on a square, the Bavarian Square. And we said, no, no, no. This has to be different. It has to be in people's eyes. It has to be a legacy for many generations. And this year, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary. When we come back, there will be a reenactment with the politicians, art people, the rabbi. It will be a whole process, also as a statement against the right wing in Germany. Because, you know, you can't just talk about it in bubbles. You have to do something in public space. And as artists, we have really great tools. So, tell you what we did. We put up 80 signs, double-sided. On one side, you have a naive picture, colorful, positive. On the other side, you have anti-Jewish laws and regulations, which we rewrote. We put them in present tense, so nobody could say, oh, that's how it was. Oh, sorry.
This sign here has a text on the back that says, files dealing with anti-Jewish regulations have to be destroyed. And under all the text is a date, February 45. So the Nazis knew there will be...
Sorry. I captured
holding it, that's why. So here you can read the German text. Files dealing with anti-Jewish activity have to be destroyed. And it's present tense, because it has to hit instantly when you read it. And it's a little bit above eye glance, so you have to lift your glance by 5 degrees and then you read the text. You may live there for 2 years, you don't see one of the 80 signs, but when you see one, you see the others. Like the one in the back, for example, the rubber stamp, there's a regulation from April 33, it says, Jewish civil servants may no longer serve the state. They are fired.
And you see also that we have installed them in a site-specific way. This last regulation was closed by the town hall. And so the site-specific thing was meant that when people go to a library, they would be reminded that at a certain moment, Jewish citizens couldn't borrow a book and read books, or couldn't go swimming in the Wannsee, or couldn't do whatever, go to school, do music, and so on. You see here the structure. This is one of the 3 maps we've put up. One is in front of the town hall of Schöneberg, one on the Bavarian Square, and the third one in front of a school where many famous people like the literature pope Reich Ranitzky went to. And there are small dots. I don't know if you can see them, small green dots, and that's where the signs are. So when you walk around, actually, if you saw one, you realize that there are many of them. I hope that you will have a chance to see it yourself. That's why we keep it rather short, to make you more curious to go there. Actually, they've been part of a film by Michael Moore, Where to Invade Next. That was a film that came out last spring, I think, something like that. And now another important happening of collective memory, Willy Brandt falling on his knees as a German chancellor in Warsaw in the ghetto to say, forgive us. No? Ah, yes. And so you see what happens then, the Spiegel. The Spiegel is like the 3rd power in Germany. You know, the Spiegel knows everything, even my age, and they know just everything. So the Spiegel asked, can a chancellor, a German chancellor, ask for forgiveness and fall on the knees? Is this the right way to do as a politician of an independent country and so on? Very interesting.
And for sure there's a need to do it because, as you can see in the lower part of that picture here, the SS really razed the ghetto in Warsaw. And you'll see a picture that was taken when the Nazis here put the buildings on flames and later put them down. And here is the same image, but it's printed on a poster glued to a wall or a fence around the construction site. And the construction site is the memorial for the murdered Jews in Europe. And so the group who started that said, here is the place, here is der Ort. So it's a little bit peculiar because it's not Warsaw, it's in the middle of Berlin, it's next to Parisian Square. And if you look closely on the other leaflets on that fence, you'll see, for example, the essay by Jane Kramer, Victim Germany, and on the right-hand side of it says, the discussion is a memorial. So that's when the public really said, we want to be part, we want to talk about it, we want to say, is it useful to have this memorial and what can it do? And there was a big competition and we participated in it.
Yes, and our point was you don't need an artificial place in the middle of the city. You should keep up the authentic places. You should increase the awareness also of younger people for what had happened and where these places are. And so we created this image of a bus stop in the middle of Berlin where buses would run around the city. What you just saw was in front of the thing which caused actually this memorial, Chancellor Kohl's Neue Wache, where he simply put in a pieta. And Jewish victims didn't feel included and also didn't want to be included together with SS and other soldiers. So, you know, these are all huge public discussions in Germany. They go through media, daily newspapers, news, sessions on a daily level. It's really part of society and very lively. And actually, German second television and the Israeli television took up our idea and got a bus and would let it run throughout the city and interview people and see what their reactions were. And this was all in the 90s. I'm talking about, you know, I feel like a grandmother. It feels like yesterday because I think we have still the same topic somehow. So then we invented so-called bus stop, which you can take in your hand. It looks exactly like the German train schedule, but it's red. And so that was the first edition, and then the second edition was German-English, and it would actually tell you how long it takes to get there with public transportation, with a train, and then it also tells you how long it takes you to go there by a bus, if we could ever do it. Then they got this abstract sculpture in the middle of Berlin, you know, which is kind of, it could be any kind of memorial, but it's good that it's there. Today I'm quite happy. So there is the next hard case, and I heard somebody say politics and corruption before here on the stage. Yes, look at this man. Now, he's Putin's best friend, not only your president, he's also Putin's best friend. He is working for Gazprom, a private company. He is also paid by the taxpayers. You know, we pay him, he's been the chancellor for, I think, 6 years, so he gets quite a bit of money out of that, and private, and a pension fund and private health care, which we pay for him. Okay, and so he defended a man whose family is rather peculiar. It's the Flick family. The Flick family, maybe you should continue about Flick.
Okay, here we talk about an art collection given to Berlin for 7 years as a loan. And before that, the collector, Friedrich Christian Flick, wanted to place it in Zurich. The mayor of Zurich told him, actually, our citizen would like you to pay in the slave worker fund because the money you inherited from your grandfather was acquired through the work of 50,000 slave workers your grandfather employed during the Nazi time. So that was too much for Friedrich Christian Flick, so he ran away, and he found a bankrupt city, Berlin, and they said, oh, wonderful, let's have the collection for 7 years as a loan. And we said, oh, that's peculiar, so let's start something, and we applied for money from Toto Lotto with a camouflage title, The Art of Collecting, and we got the money. And a year before the opening, we rented out billboards to start that activity around the opening. To find out about the opening, we had to look into files like a dissertation of Friedrich Christian Flick to find out about his birthday, and then we saw, oh, he will turn 60 in 2004, and that will be the opening day, because we studied him quite closely, and then we were right. So we had booked the billboards, and here is the official poster to announce his collection, a lot of Bruce Naumann's, and they picked wonderfully a picture, a work of art by Bruce Naumann, Poke in the Eye, and we said, oh, that's a gift. And
so we started, it was a whole process of artistic activities in the city. That was the first poster. We had taken that in Pigalle in Paris.
What you don't see here
is
cut off, F.C. Friedrich Christian. When we showed that image for the first time to American students, everybody was laughing, and we had no idea why are they laughing. It's Friedrich Christian, but they read the F.C. different, so that's why.
And so this is actually the image what Flick did to Berlin. He simply abused the city. His collection was exhibited in a public collection, which means that we, the taxpayers, are paying for the upkeeping of the collection. He just increased the price and the value of his collection. So we spread that out all over cafes and other places. Then we asked our friend Safrir to perform as Gretchen and to collect money, sort of, for the collection in front of the art fair in Berlin. So everybody had to pass by. That was like 2 weeks before the opening. And then, and here are the posters. And we had two kinds of posters. One says, and our lawyer advised us, we demand free admission for former slave workers. And what you see underneath is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Berlin in the Hamburger Bahnhof, in a former railway station. And the other poster says, tax cheaters, show your treasures, because Friedrich Christian Flick inherited the money from his Nazi grandfather, who made his money with 50,000 slave workers and whatever. I mean, just supporter of Goebbels and the whole Nazi apparatus. And he never paid taxes in Germany. So he ran away first to Switzerland and then to a tax haven to Guernsey, the island of Guernsey. Actually, no place in Europe, in the European community, is allowed to make contracts with a tax haven. But Berlin did it. And so you see what happened when we started gluing these posters. The Spiegel had brought a story about our action, and and everybody was there, every channel, CNN, friends of my parents saw it in Australia, me giving interviews. You know, the media is incredibly helpful if they are good, if they are, if they can spread out the word, so this was going on and on. Every morning was another interview with a radio station and so on. And then a group of anti-fascist group approached us and said, we would like to do more. Could you think about doing more? And then we rented 2 trucks, put both posters on the trucks, and they would run around the city for 2 weeks. And at the end, there was a discussion at the Academy of Arts, which is like the Académie Française, a membership academy, and where other collectors came and said, you are saving Germany's reputation. This is horrible, what is happening here. So it was a mess. Now, that was, 2004? Yeah. Well, today, he made a big donation with artworks. He paid for the restoration of some videos, and so his collection is still there.
He needed a tiny push for that.
Yeah.
Here's a project that's connected to the Reichsbank. For sure, another big competition. Whenever there's a renovation of a former Nazi building, there's a lot of money. And so we were looking back, not in the future, and we said, what stands the Reichsbank for? And in the Reichsbank, the Nazis collected all the gold from gold fillings, ingots, whatever, from conquered countries in the basement of the Reichsbank. And we said, okay, let's have Hansel and Gretel on gold and put it on the 1,000 desks in that building, because today it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But we didn't win that competition, naturally. And in the entrance, that building during Nazi time had a bird of prey, as you can see on the left-hand side, this gray building on the lower end. And we said, oh, that's a great image, bird of prey, and we want to reinstall it as an outline in neon and write down what happened in that building. Today, you see there's nothing. And here's another project from Sarajevo.
Yes, we work always together with institutions, and also the Flick project was with the New Society of the Arts in Berlin, which is a Kunstverein. This is the Neuer Berliner Kunstverein, another one. We have everything double and triple, like opera houses and everything. So we did this with the Neuer Berliner Kunstverein, who asked us to do something about the war in Sarajevo. And what we did was we went there, we went to the archive of a newspaper called Oslobodzenie Liberation, yeah, and we looked at the obituaries in the newspaper, and we translated these obituaries. But we took the names out. We didn't, we didn't personalize it, and we implanted them in another daily newspaper in Berlin, which is Taz. It's a left-wing newspaper in Berlin. I also write for. And you see that was the same time when Divine passed away. And so people could read an obituary every day for a couple of weeks and be confronted with the war 10 years after. And that's actually interesting. We realized when we were putting together the talk that we had already civil disobedience in this a collection of things. We were asked to come up for a proposal for a Rosa Luxemburg memorial. And we said the best would be to have 3 cars printed with the dogma of Rosa Luxemburg on it, which could be borrowed by Berlin's universities. We have many. We have 3 mass universities of 45,000 students, and we have smaller ones, 2,000 and so on, 12,000. So there are a lot. It's a city of students. So students could actually borrow these buses and, make demonstrations with them or use them for other rallies if they would need them for. And they would be covered with human rights. And when the cars are on the road, you would read Rosa 1, Rosa 2, and Rosa 3. And the last thing is our suggestion for social housing. When it gets modernized, you can actually put up a sculpture, a lit sculpture, you know, with a feast fighting for civil rights every day. That's actually what should be done and has to be done. There is never an end, I would say, to this process. So far, so good.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Questions, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Nelly ask 1 or 2 questions, and we'll start there.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm going to focus maybe my question more towards your experience as, you know, as artist, but also as human being, given the fact that Hannah Arendt, when she was talking about thinking, was also saying that thinking is very much rooted in the experience, right? So I would love to know, actually, how does one decide one day that, you know, their role in life is going to be focused towards, you know, the idea that you will showcase collective memories as part of your duty as, you know, as human, let's say. How did you decide that this was going to be something that you would do? And is this perhaps something to do with, you know, where you're from, your origins, or, you know, are you both born in Germany?
Well, first of all, we never talk about our personal background. Our personal background is our personal background. So
and the first question we ask ourselves...
And so why is that? Do you want to...
The first question we ask ourselves is always...
No, it's private and that's it.
So you don't see... No, but that's really interesting. So you don't see your, you know, your background and your...
Do you see it as necessary, your background?
Well, I think, yeah, clearly. Like, I personally, my entire job is to make sure that, you know, we can have a sort of a transnational form of education because, you know, my dad is from Algeria, Jew, my mom is Armenian. You know, we never really lived in anything that,
and
you
so
know.
Why is the air so interesting for you?
No, I mean, I'm just asking you if this is relevant to the way that you develop your practice.
Yeah, and I'm asking you, why is the air, why is airspace so interesting for you? Isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, I have a different approach. May I mention
that?
Yeah,
I mean, I can answer this question.
Because we have a discussion.
I mean,
Whenever we work...
We can have that discussion, but I would love to know, but I would love to know from you first. Please, Freddie.
Okay. We are professionals, and when we want to be successful, the first question we ask when we go in public space is, who is our audience? So we study it, because if you do something, you want to have an effect, you want to have an impact on society. And if you fail, you didn't think hard enough. That's my approach.
I'm not sure I really get it, so can you just repeat that?
Yes, we want to be successful.
But how is that answering my question?
If we start people to think about a subject.
Okay, so for you, the goal is to make sure that
that's the credo of this university too. Think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why we like to be at BART, because it's a place to think and to engage and to, you know, to create new things. And I think that's the right way to go out in society and act the moment things happen. You know, you don't invent things, you don't decide what you want to do one day, you will, I don't know. It's the political situation which asks for certain things, which is actually the topic of
for sure,
conference.
but so do you think that you can be taken seriously as an artist from member of the public, let's say, with, you know, the fact that, you know, you're obviously existing in the art sphere? Like, that's one of the recurrent questions that I also hear, is the idea that, you know, as an artist, because you're part of a certain market, then it means that, you know, you cannot be really critical. And that critique in the arts cannot really be taken seriously. How do you respond to that?
If you stay in the art world, it's a very small world. It's a secluded world. It's not open to the real public. The real public is outside. If you do something in a gallery or in a museum, it's the white cube. And but if you go out, it's completely different. Everybody has an instant opinion, and you have to face that if you do something in public space. And so that's a much bigger audience than the art crowd. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add something?
No.
Millie,
No,
should we take one
Yes,
question? Let's
please.
take a question from the audience and we can come back. Yes, way in the back. William.
There.
Can't see who it is,
Question,
but
maybe there, yeah.
I see a hand.
My question, I guess, is, well, you were speaking about audience and impact, and I guess to bridge the question earlier, one thing, do you think having a German audience is, say, different than having a French audience, particularly when you're talking about World War II, because they lost? And so that forces a reckoning and a conversation about public memory that might not exist otherwise. And then also, we're talking about thinking, but to me, art is also about feeling, and it seems to me that it's a way to undermine a lot of propaganda and a lot of sort of the banality, say, that Arendt talks about. So I'm wondering if you're looking more for an emotional impact or for an intellectual one. Thank you.
Do I understand it right? You meant if the audience is different in Germany than in the US? Yes, of course. I think, you know, we are such an old culture. I mean, Europe is a very, how should I say, has a long, long legacy, and the society is very self-critical. But it's not only Germany. I tend to look at things more in a European way. It is true that every country in Europe has its own standing and its own history, but still, you know, it's based on the Roman Empire, on the Code Civil also. The developments were crucial after the French Revolution, which guarantees certain kind of citizenship. There was a battle for the past 200 years, but you take some things for granted. One thing is that your government takes care of you. You have social support. Your children get free health care until they're 18. For example, in Germany and in other countries too, schools are for free, universities are for free. You know, every opera ticket is subventioned. You know, the government pays money so many different people can go actually to a concert or an opera. It's stuff like that. So there is a certain kind of security level you have in some European, or most European countries, and we take it for granted. If that is what you meant.
No, there's a different approach. Maybe I can answer it, because you were asking, as I stood the question, if there is a different audience, what would we do? For example, when we go to one of the talks at NYU, and we hear a perfect, wonderful presentation about the mass incarceration of black men in America. You think about that topic instantly, and you say, what can be done from the artist's side to bring that to a real public attention? Or when we give a talk in Boise, Idaho, and suddenly a Native American says, we need you here because you can address issues that have to be addressed. For sure, you start thinking, what could we do as outsiders? How much research do we have to invest? How much interviews we have to do? Because before we start something, we really go into archives, we interview people, we look at a lot of material, because we want to be on the spot and hit the target. Otherwise, it's not worth the effort.
You guys mentioned that the difference between creating art that's publicly funded in Europe versus not here. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was looking at the audience.
But you mentioned the importance of the fact that in Europe and in Berlin, the art is publicly funded. How does that change the way political art is done versus here, where it might not be? I mean, is that an important difference for you?
I think it's very important, because despite the fact that the government actually provides the money, it doesn't mean that you have to be nice. And that's always the joke, that actually you get this public money and then you become really naughty and you act against your, you know, the authorities. And it's even worse in Vienna. I mean, the Viennese, they have this incredible public art support, and the artists go so much against them. It's kind of independent, and I would say yes, because we, the Public Art Advisory Committee, know about it. We engage, we decide what should be done where. For example, now we have decided that there should be kind of new awareness for the Karl Marx Alley in Berlin. Now that's like, I would say, socialist architecture, very famous avenue in the eastern part of Berlin. And so we'll start, we got the money, we decided the money will be spent on first performances in public space, and after that we'll ask actually the foundation of the city of Berlin, which is also public, you know, but people can donate, but it's basically public, to give us money to encourage artists to do things, to actually build things. What we will build will be an LED wall. It will be installed there, and then we'll have like a public video gallery on the spot. And we will have also a committee, we have to decide about it still, to choose those videos. So it will be really active. The only obstacle that is still there, the whole city, the whole street is under protection. So the architecture, it's not totally clear, so we'll have to charm the head of the, you know, the, how do you call that, the city, I don't know how you call that, Denkmalschutz, protection authority of the city. Yeah, there was a lady who had a question actually over there.
Thank you. First, I love the fact that you are bringing art into the public square instead of in museums. I had a question of whether or not you ever have concerns about the possible negative impact of having commemoration of atrocities reminded in the space that they happen. I'm always concerned with the power of language and the reality that sometimes art can be ambiguous, and those who are in favor of the crimes committed can be emboldened and encouraged by their monuments to their victories, as opposed to the rest of the public being reminded and moved to prevent atrocities.
Yes, good question. I know. We had that already once at Harvard, I remember. This is something that doesn't come up in Germany. We think it's important to keep up the memory, what had happened, and how you can avoid it for the future. Let's put it that way. And I think the format, the aesthetic format we found for it, and it was quite a battle, it took us 1.5 years working on that, was that we said, children have to be approached. We have to find a way how the young generation starts early on reflecting about it. And yes, we have now, it has been renovated. We'll have the reenactment on October 28. The schools go there every day. Every morning at 10, you have visitors from Israel, who, it's very well known there. And I think it's also because it covers many fields. It's not just, you know, an abstract artwork. It's also informative. And I think that's important when you deal with topics like human atrocities of any kind, and they are very similar. When we worked on the Sarajevo topic, it was also very similar, what, you know, came up. You have to be very clear and outspoken. And you should not romanticize it and say, oh, the blue means sorrow and blah, blah. I'm just not, I don't go for that. I think that the memorial in New York, the 9/11, was far too early. You need time. You have to reflect it. And maybe it's not the last memorial. You know, they are now doing a memorial of unification in Germany. It's such nonsense, you wouldn't believe it. But let them do it. It cost a couple of millions. What the heck? We have it, we can spend it. It's important to discuss it, to try it out. Public space is also like a public kindergarten. Everybody learns a bit, people come together, and if it's not good, you'll do something else. You know, Berlin is a huge city, and other parts of Germany are huge. I mean, Munich has much more money and does much, much more in public space than Berlin. So, you know, they have several millions, and don't get me started. They're really good at it.
You're right with language. It's a very crucial topic, and we found out about it when we looked at the obituaries in Sarajevo, and the language was completely different compared to these harsh northerners like we are. It was such a flowery language, thinking about those who were killed. And we said, this is something that's so emotional, we have to bring that to Berlin and show it to the public. And the same was with the Bavarian Quarter Memorial. We found out through interviews that the people wouldn't mention the word Jew. They would say, oh, they are all in Israel. And we said, what? Now we will have the word Jew in all of the 80 signs.
Yeah, and so on. And so now we are doing an app in various languages, and people will be able to walk around with their phones and get the language they need. So that's actually a really great project, which again, Berlin finances, you know. So it's again the, how should I say, our Senate who gives the money, and it's actually the tourist department who thinks that it's really important that the tourists also get some education on that level.
So we're short on time. One last question down here, and then we will take a short break.
So you touched upon this briefly in your last response about how the 9/11 memorial was too soon. I guess my question is, what is your opinion on the way in which the United States government has approached thinking about 9/11 and expressing the message of never forget and having it? I guess, what do you think about that in comparison? I know it's not the same.
Well, the 9/11 topic doesn't bother me so much as the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. You know, these are wars nobody here likes to touch. And actually, these are the refugees we get in Europe. There are many, many people, they're not just from Syria. There are a lot of young men from Afghanistan who are fleeing the scene and leaving women and children behind, and from Iraq. And I think the US should make a standing, should take refugees. They are your refugees, it was your war. Nobody talks about it. Never seen an article in the New York Times, which I read on the daily basis, that they would even touch that thought. So this is something I want to plug in your wonderful, discursive way of teaching and discussing things at BARD. Start the discussion now. Think about how you can help these people, educate them, rebuild the country, what you can do, That's a very, very important topic, because there won't be an end to these atrocities in the Middle East if you don't step in. You have enough power and enough money to do that. And to start this engagement, that's very important. It's much more important. 9/11 is 9/11. It happened, how it happened, we'll see one day what happened. Anyway, it's there, and you think about it, especially those people, it's totally moving, and we all identified with it. But I think much more important is to see what you do with your enormous power to other nations, and how you can interfere there, help them, build it up again. It's what you did with Europe after the war.
I want to come back to your question, because there was a big mistake when Bush said it's a war on the US, but we all felt it's a war on us. And that was the biggest mistake, because it was an attack against our lifestyle all over the world, and Western lifestyle. And so we said, how can they exclude us? We are part of it. So that, I think, was the biggest mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Renate and Frida. There's a lot to think about there, about how art should respond to these wars. We're going to take a 20-minute break, and at 4:30 we will reconvene with where do we go from here.